I'm Dr. Elena Vasquez, and for 21 years, I served as the Chief Medical Officer for the Nebraska State Highway Patrol, covering the Northwestern Plains District, or at least I did, until I submitted my resignation 3 months ago. What I'm about to tell you are 4 cases that occurred on the isolated highways of northwestern Nebraska, cases so disturbing and unexplainable that they made me question everything I thought I knew about life, death, and what can happen in the vast emptiness of the Sandhills region. These aren't your typical highway accident stories. These are incidents that defied medical explanation, challenged the laws of physics, and left me wondering if there are forces at work on those endless Nebraska roads that we simply don't understand. What I witnessed out there changed me fundamentally as both a physician and a human being, and ultimately drove me to abandon a career I had devoted my entire adult life to building. My name is Dr. Elena Vasquez, and until 3 months ago, I was one of the most experienced highway patrol medics in the state of Nebraska. I held dual certifications in emergency medicine and trauma surgery, with specialized training in remote field medicine and wilderness survival, the kind of skills you absolutely need when the nearest hospital is 180 miles away and you're standing on a desolate highway at 2 a.m. with someone's life hanging in the balance. I didn't start my career planning to work in the middle of nowhere. After completing my residency at Denver General Hospital in 2003, I had offers from major trauma centers in Chicago, Minneapolis, and Kansas City. Did something about the challenge of providing emergency medical care in one of the most isolated regions of the American Great Plains called to me. Maybe it was growing up in rural New Mexico and understanding what it meant to be truly alone when something went wrong. Maybe it was the knowledge that out here, I wouldn't just be another doctor in a crowded emergency room. I would be the difference between life and death for people who had nowhere else to turn. The northwestern Nebraska plains are unlike anywhere else in America, and I mean that in ways that most people can't fully comprehend until they've experienced it firsthand. We're talking about endless stretches of Highway 2, Highway 27, State Route 97, and sections of Highway 385, where you can drive for 2 hours without seeing another vehicle, another building, or sometimes even a fence post. Towns like Bingham, Ellsworth, Lakeside, and Antioch, where the population barely breaks 200 people, and the nearest trauma center might be a helicopter ride away, assuming weather conditions allow for flight, which they often don't. This is Sandhills country, where rolling grass-covered dunes stretch to the horizon in every direction, broken only by the occasional ranch house or windmill. The landscape is deceptively beautiful during the day, with its golden grasslands and endless sky, but at night it becomes something altogether different. On a moonless night, especially during the winter months, the darkness out here is so complete and absolute that it feels like you're driving through the void between stars. In this territory, highway patrol medics don't just respond to accidents. We become the entire medical infrastructure for hundreds of square miles. I've delivered babies during blizzards on the shoulder of Highway 2, performed emergency surgery by flashlight in ranch kitchens 40 miles from the nearest road, and kept people alive for hours using nothing but the equipment I carried in the back of my patrol vehicle and whatever improvised tools I could find. The weather out here isn't just extreme, it's actively malevolent. We get ground blizzards that can reduce visibility to 0 in less than 5 minutes, with winds that regularly exceed 70 miles per hour, and temperatures that drop to 30 below 0. Summer brings its own horrors, hailstorms that can shatter every window in a vehicle and leave you stranded with no protection from stones the size of golf balls, tornadoes that appear with almost no warning and can level everything in their path, and heat waves that reach 118 degrees with no shade, no water, and no relief for endless miles. But perhaps the most challenging aspect of working in this environment is the psychological isolation. When you're responding to an emergency call 60 miles from the nearest backup, 120 miles from the nearest hospital, and 200 miles from any major city, you develop a different relationship with mortality. Every decision you make could be the difference between someone living or dying, because there are no second chances, no additional resources, and no room for error. The people who live and work in this region are some of the toughest, most self-reliant individuals you'll ever meet. These are ranchers who've worked through blizzards that would shut down entire cities, truck drivers who've been navigating these roads for decades, and families who've survived generations in an environment that doesn't forgive mistakes. When people like this call 911 and tell you they've witnessed something that defies explanation or shouldn't be possible, you don't dismiss their claims. You listen carefully, because these aren't people given to hysteria or imagination. During my 21 years patrolling these roads, I developed what I thought was an unshakable foundation of medical and scientific knowledge. I believed that every emergency, no matter how unusual or complex, could be understood and addressed through proper application of medical training, logical analysis, and systematic investigation. I had responded to over 4,200 emergency calls, handled everything from routine traffic accidents to medical emergencies so complex they were later written up in trauma surgery journals. I prided myself on being rational, methodical, and scientifically grounded in my approach to emergency medicine. I didn't believe in luck, fate, or supernatural explanations for medical phenomena. Everything had a cause, every symptom had an underlying pathology, and every mystery had a solution if you were smart enough and persistent enough to find it. This philosophy served me well for most of my career. I saved lives that other medics might have given up on, solved medical puzzles that had stumped emergency room doctors, and built a reputation as someone who could handle any situation no matter how dire or unusual. The State Patrol regularly sent me the most challenging cases, the ones that required not just medical expertise but the ability to think creatively under extreme pressure. I was confident, perhaps even arrogant, in my belief that modern medicine and scientific understanding could explain anything I might encounter on those remote highways. I had seen people survive accidents that should have been instantly fatal, witnessed the human body's incredible ability to endure trauma that seemed beyond the realm of possibility, and learned to expect the unexpected when dealing with emergency medicine in extreme environments. But nothing in my training, my experience, or my understanding of medical science had prepared me for what I would encounter during 4 specific incidents between 2019 and 2024. These weren't just unusual cases or medical anomalies. They were events that seemed to violate the fundamental laws of physics, biology, and human physiology. They forced me to confront the possibility that there are phenomena in this world that cannot be explained by current scientific understanding, and that the isolated highways of northwestern Nebraska might be subject to forces that operate outside the normal rules of reality. Before I tell you about these 4 cases, you need to understand something important about the psychological effects of working in extreme isolation for extended periods. The northwestern Nebraska plains don't just challenge you physically, they change how you perceive reality itself. After spending years responding to emergencies in this environment, you start to notice things that you can't quite explain. Sounds that carry impossibly far across the prairie on still nights. Lights that appear on the horizon where no lights should exist. Radio signals that seem to come from nowhere and contain voices speaking languages you don't recognize. Weather patterns that develop and dissipate in ways that contradict everything meteorologists understand about atmospheric physics. Most people who work out here long enough develop what we informally call plane sensitivity, a heightened awareness of subtle environmental changes that can mean the difference between life and death. You learn to read the sky for weather changes hours before they appear on radar. You develop an almost supernatural ability to navigate by landmarks that are invisible to most people. You start to sense when something is wrong in ways that have nothing to do with your normal five senses. I used to dismiss these phenomena as the natural result of sensory adaptation and pattern recognition developed through years of experience. The human brain, when exposed to extreme environments for extended periods, becomes incredibly sophisticated at detecting subtle changes that might indicate danger. What seemed like intuition or supernatural awareness was really just highly developed observational skills operating below the level of conscious thought. That explanation satisfied me for years, and it might have continued to satisfy me if not for the four cases I'm about to describe. These incidents forced me to confront the possibility that plain sensitivity might be something more than just enhanced pattern recognition, that the isolation and vastness of this environment might actually allow people to perceive phenomena that are normally filtered out by the noise and distractions of more populated areas. The first case that shattered my scientific worldview occurred on November 23, 2019. Approximately 47 miles northeast of Bingham on Highway 27. It was 1:43 a.m. on a moonless night when I received a call from dispatch about a single vehicle rollover with possible fatalities, and according to the caller, something very wrong with the whole situation. The caller was a long-haul trucker named Margaret Maggie Chen, a 52-year-old veteran driver who had been running the routes through the western states for over 28 years. Maggie was hauling agricultural equipment from Omaha to Denver and was known throughout the trucking community for her reliability, professionalism, and level-headed approach to emergency situations. She had personally witnessed dozens of highway accidents over the years and had even provided first aid at several crash scenes. When someone with Maggie's experience and credibility calls 911 and says something is very wrong, experienced dispatchers know to take it serious. I just witnessed a severe single-vehicle accident, Maggie told the dispatcher, her voice tight with a combination of confusion and barely controlled fear that was completely out of character for someone with her experience. A small blue sedan left the highway at high speed, rolled multiple times, and caught fire. The whole thing is burning pretty bad right now. But here's the problem. I clearly saw the driver get out of the vehicle after it stopped rolling, and before the fire really took hold, the person appeared to be moving normally, not injured or disoriented, and walked directly away from the vehicle into the prairie. The dispatcher asked for clarification on the driver's condition and current location, so emergency responders could focus their initial efforts on providing medical assistance to the survivor. That's just it, Maggie replied, and I could hear the frustration and bewilderment in her voice even through the radio static. I've been sitting here for 15 minutes now, and I've been watching the area where the driver walked off. This is flat, open prairie, with perfect visibility for at least 3 miles in every direction. There's a full set of truck lights illuminating the area, and I've got a clear line of sight to everywhere the person could have gone, but they're just gone. Not hiding behind something, not collapsed somewhere in the grass, completely gone. It's like they walked into the prairie and vanished into thin air. When I arrived at the scene 28 minutes after the initial 911 call, I immediately understood why Maggie Chen had sounded so disturbed. The accident scene was exactly as she had described. A 2018 Honda Civic had left Highway 27 at what appeared to be extremely high speed, traveled approximately 180 yards through the prairie grass, rolled at least 7 or 8 times based on the ground disturbance pattern, and come to rest completely upside down before being consumed by an intense fire. The vehicle was still burning when I arrived, though the flames had died down considerably from what Maggie described as a pretty intense blaze that had been visible from several miles away. Even from a distance, I could see that both the driver's side and passenger doors were standing wide open, a detail that immediately struck me as problematic, given the severity of the rollover damage. Maggie's truck was parked on the shoulder about 200 yards past the accident site, positioned so that her headlights and auxiliary lighting systems provided excellent illumination of the crash area and the surrounding prairie. She had clearly chosen her parking position strategically to maximize visibility while staying safely out of the way of emergency responders. I introduced myself to Maggie and asked her to walk me through exactly what she had witnessed, paying particular attention to the timeline and her observations about the driver's condition and behavior after the accident. I was coming up on this stretch of highway when I saw headlights way ahead of me moving erratically, Maggie explained, pointing toward the skid marks that were clearly visible on the asphalt. The car was weaving back and forth across both lanes, and I thought the driver might be having a medical emergency or falling asleep at the wheel. I slowed down and got on my CB to report a possible impaired driver, but before I could finish the call, the car suddenly veered hard to the left and left the highway at probably 70 or 75 miles per hour. Maggie described watching the vehicle roll repeatedly through the prairie grass, noting that it appeared to roll at least 7 times, maybe 8, before coming to rest upside down. She estimated that the entire rollover sequence took approximately 8 to 10 seconds from the time the vehicle left the highway until it stopped moving. The fire started almost immediately, she continued. Not like an explosion, but the flames spread really quickly through the whole vehicle. I was already slowing down and getting ready to stop when I saw the driver's side door open. This is where Maggie's account became truly disturbing. According to her detailed testimony, she watched as a figure emerged from the burning vehicle through the open driver's side door. The person appeared to be moving normally, not stumbling, not acting injured or disoriented, and showing no signs of the severe trauma that should have resulted from such a violent rollover accident. The person stood up next to the car for maybe 10 or 15 seconds, Maggie told me, just standing there like they were getting their bearings or deciding which direction to go. Then they started walking directly away from the road, heading almost due north into the prairie. They were walking at a normal pace, not running, not stumbling, just walking like someone taking an evening stroll. Maggie emphasized that the figure's movement and behavior appeared completely normal, which struck her as impossible given what she had just witnessed. Someone who had survived that kind of rollover accident should have been severely injured, disoriented, possibly unconscious, and certainly not capable of walking away from the scene under their own power. I kept watching because I was planning to drive over to where they were headed and offer assistance, Maggie continued. But here's the thing that's been bothering me for the past 20 minutes. I never lost sight of the area where they were walking. This is completely flat, open prairie, with no trees, no buildings, no hills, nothing taller than the grass itself. My truck lights illuminate everything for at least a quarter mile, and beyond that the starlight gives you pretty good visibility for another 2 or 3 miles. Maggie paused here, and I could see that she was struggling to articulate something that clearly defied her understanding of how the world worked. Dr. Vasquez, I watched that person walk maybe 50 or 60 yards into the prairie, and then they just weren't there anymore. Not like they fell down or hid behind something. There's nothing out there to hide behind. They just stopped being visible. I've been scanning that entire area with binoculars for the past 15 minutes, and there's no sign of anyone anywhere. My first priority was establishing the safety of the scene and beginning a systematic search for the missing driver. The vehicle fire had largely burned itself out, but the metal was still extremely hot, and the surrounding grass had been charred in a rough circle, extending about 20 feet from the wreckage in all directions. Even a preliminary examination of the vehicle revealed several deeply troubling inconsistencies with Maggie's witness account, not because she had been inaccurate, but because what she described should have been physically impossible. The Honda Civic had been completely destroyed by the rollover and subsequent fire. The roof was crushed flat against the seats, every window had been shattered, and the entire vehicle had been compressed to roughly half its original height. The damage was consistent with an extremely violent rollover at high speed, the kind of accident that typically results in immediate fatalities, even when passengers are wearing seatbelts. But both the driver's side and passenger doors were standing wide open, and this is where the situation became medically and physically impossible. The doors showed no damage consistent with being forced open during the rollover sequence. The hinges were intact, the latching mechanisms were undamaged, and there were no impact marks or deformation patterns that would indicate the doors had been torn open by the force of the accident. More importantly, the doors could only have been opened from the inside after the vehicle had come to rest. The rollover had crushed the roof so severely that the door frames were compressed and distorted. Opening those doors from their post-accident position would have required significant force and dexterity, not something that could be accomplished by someone suffering from the kind of massive trauma that should have resulted from this accident. I immediately initiated our standard protocol for missing persons at accident scenes. In remote areas like this, injured people sometimes wander away from crash sites in a state of shock, delirium, or altered consciousness caused by head trauma. In the northwestern Nebraska plains during late November, with nighttime temperatures dropping into the low 20s, exposure could be fatal within hours, even for someone who wasn't suffering from serious injuries. Within 40 minutes of my arrival, we had a full search and rescue operation underway. The Nebraska State Patrol brought in additional units. The Sheridan County Sheriff's Department provided deputies with all-terrain vehicles, and we had a helicopter with thermal imaging equipment en route from North Platte. The search conditions were as close to ideal as we ever get in this environment. The previous day had brought light rain, followed by freezing temperatures, leaving the ground with a thin layer of frost that would clearly show footprints, drag marks, or any other signs of human passage. The moon was new, which meant no moonlight to interfere with our thermal imaging equipment, but also meant we were entirely dependent on artificial lighting to conduct visual searches. Maggie Chen's truck provided excellent illumination of the immediate crash site and the area where she had last seen the missing driver. We supplemented this with portable floodlights powered by generators, creating a well-lit search area, extending approximately 400 yards in all directions from the vehicle. The search teams worked in a systematic grid pattern, with each team member responsible for a strip of terrain 10 yards wide. We had 4 teams working simultaneously, covering the areas north, south, east, and west of the crash site. The teams were equipped with high-powered flashlights, infrared thermometers to detect body heat, and radio communication systems to coordinate their efforts. After 2 hours of intensive searching, we had covered an area extending 1 mile in every direction from the accident site. The teams found no footprints leading away from the vehicle, no blood trail, no pieces of clothing or personal items, and no disturbance in the frost or grass that would indicate someone had passed through the area. The helicopter arrived at 4:20 a.m. with state-of-the-art thermal imaging equipment capable of detecting human body heat from an altitude of 1,000 feet. The pilot and thermal imaging operator conducted a systematic search of a 5-mile radius around the accident site, focusing particular attention on the area north of the highway where Maggie had last seen the missing driver. The thermal imaging search revealed several deer, a few cattle from a distant ranch, and 1 coyote, but no human heat signatures anywhere within the search area. While the search teams continued their work, I conducted a detailed forensic examination of the vehicle and the immediate crash site. What I found only deepened the mystery and raised additional questions that I couldn't begin to answer. The vehicle registration and insurance documents, though partially damaged by the fire, clearly identified the car as belonging to Jennifer Walsh, a 29-year-old graphic designer from Lincoln, Nebraska. But when we contacted Jennifer Walsh through the Lincoln Police Department, we discovered that she was very much alive, at home, and had reported her car stolen 4 days earlier from the parking lot of her apartment complex. Jennifer had no idea how her car had ended up on Highway 27, nearly 350 miles from Lincoln. She had last seen the vehicle on November 19th, when she parked it in her assigned space after returning from work. The theft had been reported to Lincoln police on November 20th, when she discovered it missing, but there had been no leads, no witnesses, and no trace of the vehicle until it turned up in our accident scene. Even more puzzling, the car's GPS navigation system and OnStar emergency services showed no record of the journey from Lincoln to the crash site. According to the electronic systems, the last recorded location was Jennifer Walsh's apartment complex parking lot on November 19th at 6:47 p.m. The systems showed no subsequent activity, no starts, no movement, no GPS pings, until the moment of the accident, when the OnStar system automatically activated due to the rollover sensors. It was as if the car had simply materialized on Highway 27 moments before leaving the road and rolling through the prairie. The forensics team from the State Patrol Crime Lab arrived at dawn to process what remained of the vehicle. They were looking for any trace evidence that could identify the driver: DNA, fingerprints, blood spatter patterns, or personal items that might have survived the fire. After 6 hours of meticulous examination, they found nothing that could identify who had been driving the vehicle. The fire had been too intense and too complete, destroying any biological evidence that might have been present. There were no personal items in the vehicle, no luggage, no wallet or purse, nothing that would indicate who the driver had been or where they had been traveling. As the morning progressed and our search efforts continued to yield no trace of the missing driver, I spent considerable time re-interviewing Maggie Chen about exactly what she had witnessed. I was looking for any detail, no matter how seemingly insignificant, that might explain what had happened to the person who had walked away from the burning vehicle. Maggie was remarkably composed and articulate for someone who had witnessed what she believed to be an impossible event. She had clearly been thinking about what she had seen during the hours since the accident, and she had developed her own theories about what might have happened. "De Vasquez, I've been driving these roads for 28 years, she told me, and I've seen some strange things out here over the years. Optical illusions caused by heat mirages, tricks of light and shadow that can make you think you're seeing things that aren't really there. But this wasn't anything like that. The visibility was perfect, the lighting was excellent, and I was paying close attention because I was planning to offer help to an accident victim." Maggie went on to describe the missing driver's appearance and behavior in greater detail than she had been able to provide during the initial emergency response. The figure appeared to be average height and build, wearing what looked like dark clothing, possibly jeans and a jacket or sweatshirt. The person's movements were steady and purposeful, showing no signs of injury, disorientation, or distress. "What bothers me most," Maggie continued, "is that they walked away like they knew exactly where they were going. Not like someone who was confused or in shock, but like someone who had a specific destination in mind. They walked directly north, in a perfectly straight line, at a steady pace, and then, after maybe 60 or 70 yards, they just weren't there anymore." I asked Maggie to estimate how long she had maintained visual contact with the figure before losing sight of them. "Maybe 30 or 40 seconds, she replied. "Long enough for me to get a good look and form a clear impression of what I was seeing. And then, in the space of maybe 2 or 3 seconds, they went from being clearly visible to completely gone, not gradually fading into the distance, just suddenly absent." By noon, on November 23rd, we had exhausted our search resources and protocols. We had covered a 10-mile radius around the accident site using ground teams, all-terrain vehicles, helicopter thermal imaging, and search dogs borrowed from the Scottsbluff County Sheriff's Department. We had contacted every hospital, medical facility, and emergency room within a 200-mile radius to see if anyone matching the driver's description had sought treatment. We found no trace of the missing driver anywhere. The official conclusion was that the driver had somehow survived the initial accident and wandered away from the scene in a state of shock or delirium, ultimately succumbing to exposure somewhere in the vast prairie landscape. The case was classified as a probable fatality, with the body unrecovered pending any new evidence or information, but I couldn't accept this explanation and neither could Maggie Chen. The evidence simply didn't support the theory that an injured person had wandered into the prairie and died of exposure. The ground conditions were perfect for tracking, the search had been thorough and professional, and the thermal imaging should have detected a body, even if it was no longer living. More importantly, Maggie's description of the driver's condition and behavior was completely inconsistent with someone suffering from the kind of trauma that should have resulted from that accident. A person in shock or suffering from severe head trauma doesn't walk away from an accident scene in a perfectly straight line at a steady pace, showing no signs of distress or disorientation. For the first time in my career, I was forced to confront the possibility that what I had investigated was not a medical emergency or a criminal incident, but something that fell completely outside the normal parameters of both law enforcement and emergency medicine. Someone had survived an accident that should have been fatal, emerged from a burning vehicle that should have trapped them, and walked into the Nebraska prairie, where they had simply ceased to exist in any way that our search methods could detect. The vanishing driver case stayed with me for months after November 23rd. I found myself reviewing the case files obsessively, looking for some detail I had missed, some explanation that would make everything make sense according to the laws of physics and medicine that had guided my entire career. I consulted with colleagues at major trauma centers, described the case to experts in emergency medicine and accident reconstruction, and even reached out to researchers who studied unusual psychological phenomena associated with severe trauma. None of them could offer an explanation that accounted for all the evidence. The case began to affect my confidence in ways that surprised me. When responding to other emergency calls, I found myself questioning my own observations and wondering whether I was missing important details that might indicate something unusual or inexplicable was occurring. I started paying attention to aspects of accident scenes that I had previously dismissed as irrelevant: unusual lighting effects, unexplained sounds, electronic equipment malfunctions that seemed to have no obvious cause. Most troubling of all, I began to notice that other highway patrol officers and emergency responders in northwestern Nebraska had their own stories about incidents that didn't quite make sense according to normal understanding of physics, medicine, or human behavior. These were professional, experienced people who were reluctant to discuss these incidents because they knew how incredible they sounded, but who were clearly troubled by what they had witnessed. I started to realize that the vanishing driver case might not have been an isolated incident, but rather the first in a series of events that would fundamentally challenge everything I thought I knew about reality itself. I tried to rationalize the vanishing driver case as an extremely unusual combination of circumstances that would never repeat itself. I told myself that there had to be a logical explanation I was missing, some detail that would eventually make everything make sense within the framework of conventional medical and scientific understanding. I was wrong. 7 months later, I would respond to a multi-vehicle accident during a ground blizzard that would make the vanishing driver seem almost ordinary by comparison. What I discovered at that accident scene would force me to question not just my understanding of trauma medicine, but my understanding of what it means to be alive, dead, and something that might exist in between those two states. 7 months later, I responded to a blizzard collision on Highway 385. 4 victims had been clinically dead for 2 hours in -28 temperatures, yet their bodies remained warm. So when resuscitated, they described watching my rescue efforts from above and encountering something in the space between life and death. Case 3. A family trapped in a time loop on Route 97, driving the same 15 miles for 6 hours, while their odometer recorded 847 impossible miles. Case 4. 12 strangers from different states, mysteriously compelled to drive to identical coordinates on Highway 2, empty prairie, with no explanation. These cases broke my faith in medical science. I resigned, accepting some mysteries exceed human understanding.